You have seen the recent headlines. Ukraine has been absolutely wrecking Russia's sea-based logistics. Only 9 days in, we may be looking at more than 116 vessels having taken significant damage. This, of course, is just one of Ukraine's many drone successes in the broader war. Sure, Russia has benefited from its own drone innovations, but it seems like Ukraine has the leg up here, right? Well, it is time to pick up the phone, because we will explore just that on today's edition of the Geopolitics Helpline. Why is Ukraine having so much more success with drones than Russia? Surely Russia has the capacity to produce drones at least at a scale that Ukraine does. Or am I simply stuck in my bubble and ignorant of Russia's successes? I would like to thank this commenter for the $5 donation, which is a great way to draw my attention to a question because YouTube notifies me whenever someone chips in. You know, I suppose that this could qualify as bribery, but if it does, then it fits well with one of the themes of this video. For a high-level answer, yes, I think that part of this is a problem with the Western social media bubble, but part of it is real. Let me cover the bubble first, because I can speak to that personally. Imagine that I have a video script about a huge attack that just happened. Make the title of the video, Ukraine is eviscerating Russia's logistics fleet, and I suspect that I would have a major hit on my hands. I guess we will see. Make the title of the video, Russia is eviscerating Ukraine's logistics fleet, and I will be scrapping the bottom of the barrel for viewers. There is no other way to say it than people just do not want to learn about bad news. And if you are thinking to yourself, hey, that's not me, well, you are watching a secondary channel of an exceptionally specialized creator focusing on international security affairs. You are not a normal person, and I mean that in the best way possible. Unfortunately, this leads to a couple of meta problems. Algorithms only want to feed content consumers what they will watch. If people are not clicking on content featuring bad news, then eventually the option to click on it disappears as well. At that point, the average person does not even see the headline of the bad news. They may be oblivious that the event happened at all. And then you have the meta problem. Think about my incentives as a content creator. I only have so many hours in the day. If I know that a video about bad news will not receive any clicks, I have to think long and hard about whether to produce it at all. The only thing that might push me in that direction is that a reasonable number of my viewers are in the policy world and can have significant effects on what states do. Consequently, if I think I have something that needs to be a part of the policy conversation, I may suck it up, chalk that particular video up as an economic loss, and do it anyway as a matter of social responsibility. But in a word, it sucks. Before anyone blames this on the algorithm, I do not. Algorithms only respond to what people do. It is not the algorithm's fault that people do not click on the bad news. Rather, the algorithm is just low-hanging fruit for criticism of a much broader problem with where humanity currently is. If you consume news content agnostic to whether it makes you happy, then good for you. If you do not, then the next time that you see something that does not go the way that you want it to, maybe think twice and consider learning more about it anyway. Of course, this is not the only reason why there is a bias to believe that Ukraine vastly dominates Russia on the drone front. Perhaps the biggest culprit there is that refineries create very large explosions, and thus there is considerably more documentation of Ukraine's great successes. Now compare that to what Russia does with its Shaheds. They crash into buildings. 1 or 2 people might die. An apartment block might become uninhabitable. But ultimately, it just looks like a hole. In warfare, scenes like that are a dime a dozen, so it is easy to tune out the cumulative effects of the Shahed strikes. And finally, Russia is straight up better than Ukraine at mass production of drones. Going back to the images from just a second ago, the ho-hum nature of the damage may be why it is not immediately apparent that Russia has this advantage. So yes, you probably have a distorted view of the extent of Ukraine's advantage. But that does not change how Ukraine still has the general advantage, so it is worth covering the many reasons why that is the case. As a general point, during the Soviet era, Ukraine was a hub for the engineering and aerospace sectors. As a result, this front of the war has always played to Ukraine's strength, especially as the cost of these platforms has dropped precipitously, thereby denying Russia the advantage of having the larger economy. Ukraine also has more room to innovate with drones due to the lack of alternative platforms for the corresponding missions. Kyiv had no practical way to launch into Russian core areas at the beginning of the war. That has not changed in terms of legacy platforms, aside from Western donations, but it is something that drones can and do excel at. There is also an interesting dynamic on the naval front, where Ukraine had no navy to speak of at the beginning of the war. Ukraine still has no normal navy to speak of in the middle of the war, yet has figured out how to win the naval front anyway. As a result, Ukraine will have quite a substantial drone fleet by the end of the war. Meanwhile, Ukraine's decentralized drone industry means that there is substantial competition among investors to try to capture the market share. Everyone knows that there is a large pie of profits available here, and thus everyone is competing to come out on top. This benefits Kyiv by driving down costs and increasing the quality of output. A lot has been made about how Ukrainian drone producers respond rapidly to feedback from the front lines. This is not an accident. It is a product of the system. Any startup that fails to innovate to meet what the current frontline demand is will soon find themselves out of business. And as for our last point, we can expand outside of Ukraine. On net, the Ukrainian side of the battlefield is performing better with drones. However, it is misleading to say that Ukraine alone is responsible for all of the successes. There are just as many startups in the West trying to develop these technologies as well. Fortunately, most of them do not have my path of destruction to stop them. The point is that these Western companies feel the same need to innovate as Ukraine's core. They therefore send their wares into the field and solicit Ukraine's feedback. NATO has intentionally set up tech transfer as a two-way street now, and it is working for both parties. It should not be surprising that the collective force of Western innovators is outperforming Russia. Finally, we could think about the same question from the lens of what causes Russia to struggle by comparison. Following up on the last point, Russia's counter-coalition has not been as helpful. Sure, you had the licensing agreement of Shahed drones years ago, but Iran basically gave Russia the schematics and has left the Kremlin to its own devices. China helps with production by supplying input goods and a ton of the quadcopter manufacturing components. But China also supplies Ukraine with those goods. She is willing to have an unlimited partnership with anyone who pays the right price. For the higher-end input goods, Russia does not have direct access to Western markets, which puts them behind. This is another point where China provides assistance, but it is indirect and complicated, and generally slows down Russia's process. Then you have the two biggest factors. The first of these is a lack of innovators inside of Russia. Here you have an own goal. When Putin ordered the mobilization of Russian forces in the fall of 2022, those who could responded by leaving the country. Think about the type of person who might be a good innovator. Drone development is a fairly high-tech industry. The people who are good at it likely had lucrative employment before the war, meaning that they had the money to leave the country when it came time to. They also have marketable skills, meaning that they could reliably find employment after they left. Much of their work can be done remotely anyway, so it is even possible that they could stay in their previous employment. Nonetheless, as I previewed at the top, the biggest factor of all is corruption inside of Russia. As decentralized as the innovation process is on the Ukrainian side, it is equally centralized on the Russian side. But up and down the production chain, you have corruption seeping into the system. People adding graft wherever they can, which raises the cost of drones. The shirking of responsibility for high standards. Contractors taking shortcuts where they think that they can, leading to an inferior product. Ukraine deals with its own share of corruption scandals, of course, but it is not as bad. Now, the Kremlin is not oblivious to these problems, giving rise to a second-order issue. You should only invest in an activity to the point that the marginal gain equals the marginal cost. Corruption lowers marginal gains and increases marginal costs. Consequently, the optimal investment for Russia is lower than it would be otherwise. In turn, you have less spent on an inferior product. So, to recap today's answer, part of your perception regarding Ukraine's superiority is due to an information bubble, but there is an element of truth behind it that we should not discard. Meanwhile, if you have regrettably discarded me from your daily viewing experience, you can always check the Geopolitics Helpline archives for questions that you may have missed. Perhaps it was some of that bad news? And if you enjoyed today's video, then please like, share, and subscribe, and I will see you next time. Take care.